Hello everyone, thoroughchurro here. The year 2024 has been pretty stellar for film. Even from the beginning, there has been just fantastic movies throughout. With that in mind, the Oscars just announced the nominees, and I want to talk about some of the choices they made, as well as some controversial picks. And at the end, I'll talk about a few snubs that didn't make it. Well, pretty much one that didn't make it. I unfortunately couldn't view the Oscars last year, so this year, I'm going in. Now, I have a bit to go through here, so I'm just going to randomly start and then I'll just kind of focus up near the end. Starting off the video is the film Conclave, directed by the individual that made the new All Quiet on the Western Front from a few years ago. From the beginning of this film, I didn't like how the music was already dialed up for a serious tone. It kind of stays that way throughout, and it really hindered my experience. I liked the way it looked in the beginning for the most part in terms of the lighting. There's shadows through the opening scenes that makes the tone more apparent, as well as it kind of visually showing the themes. However, as the film goes along, the music becomes more unbearable and the story becomes irritating. The plotting is very repetitive and goes at snail's pace. By the halfway point, this film is a challenge to get through. There's implied tension near the end of the film, but I was so uninterested in its events that I truly didn't care. The editing was also kind of clunky at times. Nothing about the technicals is noteworthy. The lighting looked nice, but there's some scenes that I felt looked bad in terms of the framing and camera work. It's a slow experience that fizzles into nothing really. With all that in mind, this film was nominated for 8 Oscars, some being Best Screenplay, Music, Editing, and even Best Picture. With all those nominations, I was reminded of the film Don't Look Up from a few years ago. That film gathered all of these nominations, even though the elements that they were nominated for went against the experience of the film. Same with Conclave. The elements that the Oscars are praising isn't even that great. It's kind of a bland film that implies its importance, and I'm giving this a 4 out of 10. The next film I'm talking about is The Apprentice, directed by Ali Abbasi. This director made a pretty interesting film a couple years ago called Holy Spider, and with that film, it was supposed to have a shock value to it that worked to a degree. This film, The Apprentice, I believe does that as well, but not as effectively. This film is about Donald Trump and how he became the comic book villain that he is today. I will say the performance from Sebastian Stan was pretty solid as Trump. The story and pacing was a little one note for me. It just kind of followed him from point A to point B and so on. The film added events for the sake of shocking the audience, like a sexual assault and whatnot. It really felt thrown in and didn't add anything to the film. The film was kind of boring, and I was semi-interested in it throughout, but never felt fully engaged. There was one scene near the middle that I really thought added a lot to the character. It was when Trump was talking to his father. The way it was handled made Trump seem truly monstrous and almost psychotic, and it was very interesting to pick up on that. Overall, I didn't love this film, and I felt like it was made for the sake of provoking, which isn't bad by any means. I just needed a little bit more for me personally. I'm giving this a 5 out of 10. The next film I really want to talk about is the new epic The Brutalist. This was directed by Brady Corbett. He was a well-known actor that has some directing under his belt. This film kind of blew up in the festival art house scene. This film is a 3.5-hour long epic about an immigrant that makes it to America, as well as becoming a popular architect. From the beginning, the cinematography was amazing. There's so many fantastic wide shots that looked breathtaking. I was pretty lucky to have seen this film in IMAX because it was shot in VistaVision, which means it was pretty much made for the IMAX experience. Even though there was a majorly long runtime, the pacing felt nice and I was always engaged with what was going on. The acting was very good from most of the actors, and there were some interesting moments that I still remember. Adrien Brody is just a phenomenal actor that does a wonderful job. From early in the film, he brings an emotional performance that's really believable. A really big problem that I have with this film would definitely come from the writing. As the film progresses, it becomes a bit uninteresting in what it's presenting. Like, the character does drugs, builds a building, and kind of gets mad at people. Like, for a really long film, I did feel a bit of repetition. And the third act was kind of upsetting to me. Like in the film The Apprentice, there was a sexual assault that felt kind of thrown in for the sake of the plot. The same happens in this film as well. Like, the act felt like really out of left field. And in terms of the film, it felt like the creatives kind of didn't fully know how to set up the third act, so they just threw a sexual assault scene in to add more conflict and drama. That's how it came off to me, and I think that's kind of disrespectful and really upsetting to me, to be completely honest. And when it came to the end specifically, I really didn't feel like it got too much out of it. There were beautiful frames and beautiful acting throughout, and I enjoyed my time with the film for sure. And I'm really glad I got to see it. At the end of my first viewing, I'm giving this film a 7 out of 10. Now, I want to talk about some of the standout acting nominations from this year. Mickey Madsen and Yura Borisov both got acting nominations for Minora, which I thought was awesome. Most of the acting in that film is pretty stellar, but they both were true stars of the film, bringing heartfelt and comedic moments to it. Sebastian Stan also got a nomination as Trump in The Apprentice, which to be honest makes sense. It was a provoking and political choice, so I get why they nominated him. However, Jeremy Strong got a performance nomination as well from The Apprentice, and to be truthful, they both were the best part of the film, so I get it. Adrian Brody also got a nomination for The Brutalist, which is pretty cool, because he does an amazing job, not only with his accent, but with the emotion of it all as well. And what really hit me was Demi Moore for The Substance. The Substance is one of my favorite films of the year. As extreme as it is, to get nominations is fucking awesome. But I'll talk more about that later. A Complete Unknown also has 2 acting nominations for Timothée Chalamet and Edward Norton. Speaking of which, A Complete Unknown is directed by James Mangold. An older film of his was Walk the Line, another biopic about Johnny Cash. So he's pretty familiar with this style, and overall I really enjoyed my time with this film. The film follows Bob Dylan as he kind of got his footing in the music industry, as well as him changing within the industry. What I find funny about this film is that the story is about changing of tradition and moving forward, but this is told in the most traditional and kind of generic way possible. That was just a funny observation in my opinion. I really like the music that Bob Dylan plays, so I was very much engaged with it from that part, and I found the performances to be pretty great and fun. One standout would be Edward Norton for me. I don't fully know much about Peter Seeger, but he gives off Mr. Roger vibes, and I was down for it. Timothée Chalamet also does a pretty solid job playing Bob Dylan. In comparing it to the director's previous film Walk the Line, I kind of prefer this one over that. I kind of like the editing as well as the way the film was shot in this one more. There were some pretty smart choices over where to cut, and I thought it was pretty effective. I had a good time with this even though it did feel a little generic. I'm giving this a 6 out of 10. One documentary I wanted to watch before making this review was No Other Land. I'm not much of a documentary viewer, but that one looked fantastic and I've heard great things about it. I definitely have to check that out. It's just that I'm usually really bad when it comes to the documentary section. Also, something I noticed about this year's animation category is that it wasn't really consumed by Disney movies. Yes, Inside Out 2 was in there, but there's a good variety of artful films as well. 2 that stuck out to me were A Memoir of a Snail and Flow. The first film I want to discuss is Memoir of a Snail. This was directed by Adam Elliott. He's an Australian director that has a clear love and passion for animation. Now, I was familiar with the last film he created, Mary and Max, and many years later he comes back with this beautiful film. I absolutely loved this film for many reasons. The story is so beautiful, and I cared so much for the characters throughout the whole film. This was very funny, but also extremely emotional and heartfelt. The film follows a girl named Grace as she recalls her life and how she got to where she is. As I already said, I love the characters. I really think that's my favorite part of the film. The pacing is really brisk, with only being 90 minutes long, and I definitely could rewatch this again. The main character is hyper fixated on snails for the majority of the film, and it very much has traits of a snail. What's awesome about this film is that it doesn't overstay its welcome, and it's very well presented. There are little tiny details throughout the film that add so much humor and charm. I truly loved my experience, and I'm confident with giving this a light 9 out of 10. This film was only nominated for Best Animation, but I truly think it should have had at least the cinematography. Oh, and music. The music was wonderful and fit perfectly for the story. How I gauge whether or not a film is deserving of a category for the Oscars is if it fits and works well in service of the story it's trying to tell. And I think Memoir of a Snail does just that. The next film in the animation category that I liked is called Flow. This is an animated film from the country Latvia. This film was nominated for 2 Oscars, Best Animated Film as well as Best International Film. The film follows a cat that is so adorable looking as they go through a super flood. The film also doesn't have any humans, nor does it have any dialogue as well. Just for starters, I love the animation of the cat, and pretty much all of the animals in the film. The style and execution of the animation was really well done, and I thought it looked incredible. It looks really believable while also having a certain animation charm to it. Like with the cat character, you can tell the expressions and emotions of the cat through the little guy's face, but it's very believable through the animation of his body. So that balance between both was really well done. I really love how they decided to present and show this film also. The way it was created gives off real camera work vibes, all in an animated environment. From very early on, I was extremely attached to the cat's character. One was because of the visual and environmental storytelling. There are remnants of the past sprinkled through the film that is very interesting to pick up on. It all makes the world seem more lived in. Within the film, there are themes of coexistence, especially through times of crisis. I loved how all the animals had their own personalities, and by the end I was just pleased and left emotional. It was a beautiful experience that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. Now, I have yet to see The Wild Robot, lot, but to be truthful, those are not bad choices for Best Animation. And Flow was not a bad choice for Best International in my opinion. But when it came to international films, some left people more confused over why they were nominated. And with that, Emilia Perez section, spoilers, Emilia Perez.
Oh god.
Emilia Perez. Now, I'm going to talk about a film that has a lot of people talking, mostly for negative reasons. Emilia Perez. Oh boy. This film has been around since the Cannes Film Festival back in May. Around that time, the film won Best Ensemble Cast at Cannes, and a lot of people fucking hate this movie. Before I saw it, the large crowd of hate that this film received did influence my perception, but through it all, I did understand I have not seen the movie, and I shouldn't make assumptions until I actually watch it. But before I go any further, I wanted to address what exactly is the problem with the film. And to be completely honest, I didn't fully know for certain. When it came to the online hate, it was just kind of blind hate. Like, oh, this movie is the worst of the year, and some people were calling it the crash of our era, and stuff like that. People argue that the film is disrespectful to trans people as well. And what I say to that is trans identity and representation in media is a complicated situation. So to whoever felt like this film poorly portrayed the trans experience, I don't argue with that at all, because the trans experience is different for everyone. Also, it appears that people who are Spanish and fluent in the Mexican accent found this film hard to watch also. I completely understand that as well. I can see that someone could be taken out of the movie because of that. Now, as I say that, I personally feel like the rest of the hatred for this film was kind of over-exaggerated. It isn't a perfect film by any means, and I am also just as confused about the 13 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, that this film got. Like, that's a lot of nominations for this film. But there were things that I did enjoy about the film. One thing I did enjoy for the most part was the music and direction. Most of the musical numbers felt well choreographed and had a lot of creativity in them. There's lots of creative shots and camera work through all the musical moments. I do agree that the musical aspects are kind of silly and inappropriately toned. Adding a story like this with serious elements as a musical is very strange, and I definitely don't think they nailed it in that field. That being said, this film is trying to be a little different and creative. However, there are misfires in terms of the music. Like one scene at a ceremony banquet definitely fell flat for me. There are some things that are just not as effective as they could be. However, I really did like the first musical number that the film starts with. One of the main characters is writing on her computer, and as inspiration is coming to her, music is all around her. It's a great way to start the film and was pretty fun to watch. Some people were making arguments that the characters are shallow, but I personally found the characters to be very interesting and have a lot to say. The main character, Emilia, feels like they constantly need to hide from their loved ones about the transition that they went through, to the point where they left their loved ones and started a new life. I did think it was kind of weird that the character doesn't just be honest with the people around her, but from the character's perspective, they grew up around difficult environments. They most likely felt like they needed to hide this part of themselves for some reason. But the idea of having to leave your loved ones to truly be yourself is, in my opinion, complicated and kind of emotional. It's interesting characterization and moments like that I find engaging with the film. Some people also argued that because the main character leaves her children to transition is like a negative portrayal to the trans community. First off, when I heard that argument, I thought that was a major generalization. Like, the film is showing a specific character. Characters can be flawed. Imperfection and flawed characters is interesting when it comes to art, in my opinion. I could understand the argument that the character Emilia comes off one note and shallow in the beginning. It is not until much later that the character has more development. One thing I kinda didn't like was in the beginning of the film. The main character was focused heavily on the sex change operation rather than like self-identity, and with that in mind, I do kind of feel like the film misunderstands the trans experience in that way. And also take my knowledge with like very little authority, because I am not a trans individual, but the trans experience is more about learning yourself and the acceptance of it all rather than just like surgery. Like, there are many trans individuals that don't want transition surgery. It's mostly just about accepting themselves. But that is also the complicated part of this film and the discussion of this film, is that every experience is different. The character in this film thinks the operation will instantly fix everything that they are feeling, and that really isn't the case. There are themes of change and almost redemption through change. The ideas the film presents could have been handled a much better way for sure. Also, side note, in the middle of the film, the main character just flashes a gun randomly. I know it was trying to be a humorous moment, but it was very weird and out of place. Also, there's a romance that felt really abrupt in this film, and it felt kind of rushed and went nowhere by the end. The second half does lose focus and kind of meanders to find an ending. Now, the director made a pretty solid film back a couple years ago called Dupin, and the ending of that film feels really similar to the ending of this one. I did not like the ending of Dupin, and I do not like the way it ends for this film also. I'm left a little confused by the whole experience for a few reasons, but overall I did feel like like the direction and acting were really well done. Pretty much every actor does a solid job with their performance, as well as Selena Gomez. And from what I heard online, she did a horrible job, but upon viewing the film, she had some great acting moments that were really believable to me. Take in mind, I am a non-Spanish speaker. I kept along well enough through the film, and I think the pacing was good for the most part. I genuinely felt like this was a solid experience. So when people were saying this movie was the worst of the decade, like Crash from 2004, if you're not familiar with Crash, it's actually a terrible film that is unbearable to watch. It's so tone deaf, it's kind of hilarious. So when people were saying that, I was more confused with this one for sure. I do think there was some bandwagoning going on when discussing Emilia Perez. Disliking this film is kind of a trend right now in the movie circle. Everyone is entitled to their opinion, of course, but with that in mind, don't have a group make up your opinion. What's the point of film and film discussion if you aren't even trying to engage with the art form? Make up your own opinions. If you came to the conclusion that this film is garbage, then that's great. But if you haven't even seen the movie and are just spreading that one musical number around and saying the film is garbage, you're contributing to a bandwagon problem. With that in mind, I am a little mixed about this film, and I didn't love it. I definitely don't think it deserves 13 Oscars also, and I think I'm giving this a 6 out of 10. I think now is the time to discuss Best Pictures. This year I've seen almost every Best Picture nomination. The only one I haven't seen is the Brazilian film I'm Still Here. I didn't see the film not because it looked bad or anything. I'm actually really interested in watching it. It's just I don't have a way to currently watch it. I'll definitely catch it when I can though. I was also kind of surprised that I saw most of the films before they were announced. Some I already reviewed on this channel, but let's just get into them. The first Best Picture nomination was Sean Baker's Anora, with 6 Oscar nominations. This was no surprise, as this film was making the rounds through the award season, as well as winning the Palme d'Or back at Cannes. It's a fun film that has a complex and bold ending that I absolutely love. 8 out of 10. Next was The Brutalist with 10 Oscar nominations. This film was also no surprise because of all the buzz it got through award season. With amazing cinematography as well as interesting and engaging performances, it definitely makes sense. I already gave my opinion a little while ago, and I still believe that what they decided to do for the third act didn't really do it for me. I still thought it was a genuinely great experience though. 7 out of 10. Next was A Complete Unknown with 8 nominations. This was probably the safest choice that the Oscar people could vote for. It's entertaining while having something to say. I give it a 6 out of 10. Next is Conclave with 8 nominations. Well shot for the most part, but other than that, I did not get much out of this. Didn't really do it for me. In my opinion, this is definitely one of the weakest nominations of the whole Oscar season. Next is Dune 2 with only 5 nominations and no directing nomination for Denis Villeneuve. I will say that the best cinematography nomination for Greg Fraser was dope. Through the whole year, this film has been a top contender as my favorite. It's just so entertaining and exceptionally well made. I love this film and I'm giving this a 9 out of 10. Next is Emilia Perez. Oh boy. 13 nominations. That is, I think, the most nominations this year. Many people find that to be insulting and kind of a joke. While I didn't hate the film, I am left a little confused as to why they got that many nominations. It's a strange decision all around. I'm just gonna leave with a 6 out of 10. Next up is Nickel Boys with 2 Oscar nominations. This was directed by Ramel Ross, and it follows 2 young men as they are in a correctional facility. The film documents the horror and prison-like atmosphere that they went through. I will say, as I think about the film more, I am fascinated over how the film was presented. The film is mostly through a first-person perspective, as it follows the 2. I love how purposefully presented most of it was, and when the creatives decided to change the shots, there was a good reason for it. It was heartfelt and has beautiful acting throughout. I will say some of the acting in the beginning was a little strange. It did feel like some of the actors were reading their lines rather than performing them. And as much as I love the film's presentation, I don't think the film did a great job with its pacing. I don't think the film needed to be as long as it was. And there was a point where I really didn't know how the film was going to end. It kinda just meandered for a while until it ended, and I was kinda left unsatisfied with how they decided to pace everything. That being said, it's a beautiful and harrowing film that I very much am glad I watched. It's a solid experience, and I'm giving this a strong 6 out of 10, really close to a 7. The next best picture is The Substance, with 5 nominations, which in all honesty is more than what I was expecting, let alone a best picture nomination. I absolutely love this film. It's a film that doesn't get tiring, and even after seeing it multiple times, it just gets more interesting the more I think about it. It also got a best director nomination, which is so cool. Demi Moore got a best actress nomination. It's just good vibes for The Substance gang. This is my personal choice of the year, as it's my favorite. I love this film so much, I'm giving this a 10 out of 10. and the final nomination is Wicked. The film has 10 nominations. It's a fun experience, but it wouldn't be any of my personal picks, to be perfectly honest. The music was fine and everything, I just don't think the film was presented in the best way possible. It could have been better personally, and I'm giving this one a 5 out of 10. So with everything in mind, what did we learn today? Challengers got no nominations, and that's what we learned. An actual crime. You could have given like half of Emilia Perez's nominations to Challengers. Like that film gets 13 and Challengers gets none. What are we doing here? What's happening? Like every year, there's always a million movies that they could have chosen, and I'm always of the opinion that everyone's list is going to be different. But with that in mind, Challengers deserves the Best Picture, Best Director, Best Music, Cinematography, and perhaps a writing also. Oh, and editing also, yeah. Call me biased, but with that being my favorite of the year, I am genuinely upset. Anyways, I've been talking for a long time. Thank you for watching. This was really fun to make, and I'm really excited to see what the Oscars are going to be like this year. I think that's all for me though. Bye-bye now.